Welcome back to our line. Panelists will hear from the mayor on this issue in about 10 minutes, and that's safe outdoor spaces. Now, it's been a contentious topic for Albuquerque City Council. Last month, council voted 5-4 to outlaw safe outdoor spaces. That decision was met with a repeat veto from Mayor Keller and another veto, override this time, attempt that fell short Wednesday night. Now, after 3 vetoes from the mayor on this issue, should the council reconsider their approach here, Merritt Allen, or is this the start of another year where the council and the mayor just go back and forth on this issue?
I think it's possible that the council and the mayor may be debating safe open spaces up until the 2025 mayoral election. It is vote badminton. We have really the clincher vote is District 8 Trudy Jones, who's not running for re-election from what I have read. And she has a pretty safe Republican seat. I think it's likely that the Republican who does not replace her, who will be declaring for election this year, it's a safe Republican seat, will not share her view that safe open spaces are a good idea. So it's got to happen this year. This impasse has to be broken this year. So there's that political reality. And then I think there's just the general frustration that the city is feeling. Millions of dollars have gone into the effort for the homeless. We have, as a result, a 30-unit tiny homes village that was built at a cost of over $800 per square foot.
Right.
That's a lot nicer than my house.
Yep.
The $14 million Gateway Center opening next week, which will yield 50 beds. So that's about $280 per bed. So we're seeing long delayed projects, lots of money, and 80 beds coming out of it. That's a lot. We have a lot more homeless than we're creating overnight beds or transitional homes for them. Meanwhile, we don't have much of a plan, as opposed to, well, let's just, have ad hoc campgrounds. We had Coronado Park, which just blossomed exponentially. And it seems like with this Safe Open Space initiative, we're just trying to put toothpaste back into the tube.
Right.
With the rules, with the regulation, I think some of the most problematic unhoused individuals are not going to go there. And so the core issue that everyone is so concerned about with regard to sanitation, crime, drugs, it's not going to happen. We still have, the free public transit, which is causing problems with crime and sanitation on our public buses. That's not what every homeless person is, but it's creating a label and a stigma on everyone who is facing homelessness that I think was not the intent. But the utter lack of planning and reaction and the allowing of this crisis to truly snowball has created this problem. And so the impasse between the mayor and the city council, I think, is just a much smaller part of the massive issue that Albuquerque faces, that there seems to be no real solution for, despite millions of dollars spent.
Good point there. Good points there. Julianne, out of the 3 outdoor safe spaces, 2 are reserved, if that's the word, for those who are with cars. And that's a good idea because there's a little distinction there. But the 3rd safe outdoor space has received a lot of pushback from nearby businesses, with 7 different appeals filed against the city. And among those complaints is the concern that the nearby Sunset Memorial Park has previously had to deal with a lot of homeless in tents. And would this safe space actively address this concern, or in fact, would it encourage more tents to be up in that area? And that's a difficulty. I've driven by that Memorial Park when there have been tents up there. I'm curious your point of view on that.
I think it's difficult to know what the effect will be until we try it. And I think with a lot of these, kind of fear-based opposition to new ideas, that trying to prognosticate what will happen, it is problematic. But I do think that having sanctioned spaces where people are welcomed to set up camp and they have access to some basic sanitation services, unlike, gathering places that just sort of happen in spaces where folks can camp because, like, quote unquote, no one cares.
Right.
You know, we certainly have that happening in, you know, as you mentioned, sometimes it's happening in public parks. In Santa Fe, there was a rule for during the pandemic that allowed people to camp in parks. We didn't have a Coronado Park situation happen here, but we are seeing encampments pop up in places that are sort of, you know, forgotten plots of land. And I think everyone can agree that encouraging people who are living on the streets to get to places where they're welcomed versus being in places where they're unwelcomed is a step in the right direction.
Michael, I'm curious here, is there another way councilors can address their constituent concerns about these spaces here without trying to remove them entirely? What I mean by that is we seem to do this backwards. Council makes a vote, then they go out and take the temperature of their constituency second, and then come back and make another kind of a vote when they've realized they're getting not, you know, it's not working out too well. Is there a middle ground here you can see where council can actually engage their constituencies a little bit more and talk about these things?
Well, I think this may not be an answer to your
That's all right.
directly to your question, but I think that, you know, I'd be curious to know how knowledgeable are the city councilors as it relates to the problem of homelessness.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, how knowledgeable are they about the programs that are out there so that they can engage their constituents in coming from a base of knowledge? I mean, I'm not saying they don't. Maybe some of them already do have a clear understanding of what the city's offering and the programs and who, you know, the city is targeting to assist. I mean, clearly there's the homeless population is a range of people. There are people who have substance abuse, drug issues, who've been homeless for probably quite some time, and then there are women and children and elders, seniors who are out there for a variety of reasons. So, you know, do city councilors and do even the system, the mayor's programs, do we really have a thorough understanding of who the homeless are and what they need? And that's a question that comes to mind for me.
Just a quick note here, guys. The Martinez. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Only then can we really, I think, create the kind of measures that need to be in place.
Just a quick note I wanted to get there. Sorry about that, Michael. The Martinez Town Association, along with the Menaul Business Community, is going to hold a meeting at 6 o'clock at the Menaul Gym on Monday. That's the 9th, to express their concerns against the city-sanctioned encampments in that Menaul area, in the Martinez Town area. Merit, interesting. I'm going to get to this in the second part of my interview with the mayor, but the faith community is really stepping up here. They're actually just saying, look, we can handle some of this. Should we be bringing the faith community a little closer to the decision-making process here? I mean, where there's a will, there's got to be a way here, and let's talk to the people that have a will.
I do think so, because there is a desire and there is a capacity, and there are already programs in place with regard to this. Perhaps overnight, particularly some of the big box churches that have the large parking lots, who would be willing to have people park there overnight. This is there are some great resources that would be available. There are already, you know, the Catholics have the St. Vincent de Paul Society that are already providing food and meals. So there are entrenched decades-long programs to help the needy that exist in the faith community that the city could tap into. And I know the faith community would be very happy to help.
Good points there. Thank you to our Line Opinion panelists. We'll be back for one final discussion on the recent settlement by the Archdiocese of Santa Fe in less than 10 minutes.